Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Toronto Jazz Pianist, Keyboardist, and composer Teri Parker. She talked about her latest CD, 2017's In the Past. She was born and raised in Toronto and has gone on to great things in the jazz world. She's had the opportunity to study in New York City with world-renowned pianists and composers like Aaron Goldberg and the great Fred Hersch. These days, she leads her own band, the Teri Parker Quartet, and co-leads the Parker Abbott Trio with pianist Simeon Abbott. So please get to know her and dig this interview, my friends.
Again, Teri, thank you for taking a minute out. I really enjoyed the album, and that's really what I kind of want to talk with you about at the top of this interview is getting kind of an idea of how you feel about this album In the Past.
I'm happy with how it turned out. It's my first recording with this quartet. This band has been playing for a while now, like since 2012, and this is our first full-length recording. And I'm really happy with how all the compositions turned out and how all the playing turned out.
Well, so why did it take so long to get to this point to record an album?
Well, we did a bunch of, demos and video demos and things, but the main reason is always funding, like getting the funding together. So in Canada, the usual practice is to keep applying for grants until, one kind of comes through. So, and also I wanted to keep working on my composition skills until I felt I had quality music, like really, like high quality. I felt really happy with how the level of compositions and the band before I recorded. So it was sort of a combination of those two things. I had gotten a couple composition grants from the Toronto Arts Council here and had, spent a couple years developing those skills while the band continued to, play shows and, record, demos and things, just so we had something online. And then I applied for a Toronto Arts Council recording grant, which we got 2 years ago. So then that kind of gave us the financial means to record the album the way I would want to record it, like in a professional studio with, the best quality engineers and that kind of thing.
Right on. So what do you want the bands out there that pick up this album to get from it? What are you hoping they take from what you've done?
Well, I'm hoping that they, enjoy the music, that, it's something that they want to just put on and listen to when they're kind of doing whatever they're doing. Some of the songs are playful. Some of the songs are kind of rockish, from my rock influences. So I wanted to be something that people enjoy to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So were you born and raised in Toronto?
Just outside, about an hour outside of Toronto.
Okay. So give me an idea about your childhood. How did you get so enraptured in jazz, and how did your music life take off?
Well, my parents own a music studio in Milton, which is about an hour from west of Toronto here. So I was always kind of surrounded by music. They both played. My dad was an accordion player. Actually, my mom was an accordion player too. And then they kind of switched to piano when accordion at some point was the main instrument people learned, and it kind of at some point fell out of fashion. So then they became piano players. And so at their teaching school in Milton, I took lessons there, and then I participated in all the different activities like concerts and festivals, and they ran rock band programs. And also all the public schools I went to had really great band programs and great band teachers. So in middle school, we had a great band teacher and a good jazz band there. So I played like alto saxophone in the bands through middle school and high school. And then in high school, I was dating a guy who was going to jazz school, and that kind of got me into jazz because in Milton at that time, jazz wasn't very common. Most people were listening to, like on the radio in our house was like the Beatles and Rolling Stones and that kind of thing. And so, mostly rock music from the 90s, listening to grunge rock and stuff. And then I started listening to jazz when I was dating this guy, and he, we were listening to albums together and stuff, and he ended up going to music school, and I thought, I always loved music. I knew I wanted to go to music school. And when I discovered, I could go for jazz, not classical, because I did a lot of classical piano, that was exciting for me, because it's more social. You get to play in bands, and you get to improvise, and there was, I just was much more drawn to it than the classical world. So after, all that middle school, high school, doing all kinds of things, I ended up going to University of Toronto for jazz performance, and then I've been in Toronto ever since, playing and writing and having fun.
Right on. What were those jazz albums that you listened to that really got you going, that really made you feel like jazz was something you loved?
I'd say at the start it was a lot of like the groove kind of jazz, like Medeski, Martin and Wood, John Schofield, that kind of jazz. But I also loved Brad Meldau, especially his first few trio albums, like Art of the Trio 1 and Art of the Trio 3. I also had Bill Evans' You Must Believe in Spring, and I had that on like repeat when I was in high school. Those were a few, I guess, that I loved.
Wonderful. Everybody gets their own kind of carte blanche set of experiences when you go to college. And going in and learning jazz, what kinds of things did a university education give you about jazz and being a musician?
I mean, I'd say they give you a huge amount of information, more than you can digest in 4 years, really. I even remember asking one of my teachers, like, are we supposed to be able to do all this really well? He said, oh, no, we're giving you about, like, a lifetime of information in these 4 years. So it was just jam-packed. Like, you'd be working on, we had improvisation class, and we had ear training, like jazz ear training. We had theory. We had jazz arranging, composition class. We also had ensembles and private lessons. So it was very, music-based. It was a music-intensive program. Although everybody there does also like one art, like kind of general class, like an English class or a film class or whatever. But it was really heavy on all the music courses and just a huge amount of information. We would be working on one topic in improvisation class for 2 weeks only, and then we'd have like a test basically to demonstrate you could play the thing they gave you, whether it was might have been a John Coltrane thing or patterns or different scales, and then they'd move on to a new topic. So you didn't have a lot of time on each topic, and I think the idea was they just give you a lot of things to work on that they expect you to continue working on even once you graduate, which I've done basically. I feel like I'm still absorbing things from them.
You've been fortunate over the years to actually learn from some pretty noted jazz cats like Fred Hersch and Aaron Goldberg. What do you learn from people, veterans of the jazz craft, that have so many years of experience, not only in the studio, but on the road and just in general? What do they give you?
I'd say with Aaron Goldberg, the main thing I learned was, I remember very clearly the first thing he told me when I had a lesson was he said, rip up all your paper. So, like, the main idea being to learn, especially specifically learning how to be a better improviser, to really make it, like, completely an oral learning way. Like, so using, only your ears and because in the past before that, we had people like Dave Liebman come to Toronto and do master classes, and his system was, transcribe these solos, but then write them out and analyze them and learn from them that way. Whereas Aaron was more, don't write them out, just play them, absorb them, get the information from them, and then start working it into your own playing. So a huge amount of transcribing, I'd say, is the thing that Aaron wanted me to do. With Fred, and it was sort of Fred Hersch and Sophia Rosoff. Sophia Rosoff was Fred Hersch's teacher, or it still is. I think he still sees her sometimes. It was a lot about technique, so changing how I was playing the piano, like how I was approaching playing the instrument. Instead of using your fingers to play, he'd talk about using your back or your arm to play more. And then I had some lessons with Guillermo Klein, so those were on composition, analyzing great composers and great composers' compositions, and learning some skills and strategies for your own compositions that way. So I got different things from all the teachers, I would say. Study with them all at the same time, because then I got all these different things all in the same 3-month period.
Well, the interesting thing is that after all these years and all the education and all the experience you have performing, you're a teacher. So what is your approach with your students?
It depends on the student. So I have a bunch of adult jazz students. So then we're learning tunes and how to improvise and stuff. But then I also have a lot of kind of students who are younger who are just learning to play the piano, basically. So I'd say with the kids, I do like them to go through method books. Like I use these Faber and Faber method books, so we do that. But then I also want them to have fun, because, they need to enjoy what they're playing. So they'll pick different pop or rock songs that they want to learn, and I teach them those, and we do learn those songs by ear as much as possible. But I find trying to get students to learn with the oral approach challenging, because if they don't really practice every single day, they can't really do it, because they would just forget it all, right? If you're practicing like using your ears only, and of course students aren't always practicing every day. So even with my jazz students, I find we will use lead sheets and things and work that way. And and as much as possible, I try to pair them up with other students so they can play together. I find a lot of the students nowadays aren't playing enough in groups or with other people, which is something I got a huge amount of when I was growing up. And so I try to pair them up as much as I can, because I think that's a really important skill, that they right away at every level are playing with other students or other musicians.
You got your first quartet album that's come out. You're leading the quartet. You co-lead the Parker Abbott Trio. You play on a regular basis. How do you feel about your career up to this point?
I feel good. I feel like I've accomplished what I've set out to accomplish. Like with the Parker Abbott Trio now, we've released 3 albums. The first album had more covers on it. It was just a duo piano. But then the last 2 were trio with drums, and they have all original music, which was a goal of mine to do albums with original music on them. And then also to release a quartet one under my own name. Right. And then with the Parker Abbott Trio this year, we played a couple jazz festival shows in Toronto. We did the Toronto Jazz Festival and the Halifax Festival. So I feel like, things are still moving forward and continuing to move forward. So that feels good to do that. And to be able to keep playing with my group. Like, we've got a bunch of CD release shows coming up in October. And then after that, I'll continue to book more shows and do more tours and that kind of thing. And then, just kind of keep doing it. But yeah, I feel good about how everything's gone so far.
So let's talk about live shows. What live performances, jazz-wise, do you see that really were just amazing, that influenced who you are, and just something that's cemented in your brain?
I'd say a lot of the ones in New York, because you get to see, I love Jerry Allen. I was very sad when I heard that news earlier this year. I saw her with Esperanza and Terry Lynn Carrington at the Village Vanguard a few years ago with their trio, which was amazing. And I saw Brad Meldau's trio there a few times as well. I also love going to the Jazz Standard. I saw Julian Lage, who's great, and Miguel Zanon. I saw him there. There's so many. It's hard to name them, There's so many great shows.
Let's get a little fantastical here. Let me ask you a quick question, and it's this. If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see a show, who would you go see? Where would you go?
I think it'd be pretty amazing to, go to back in the 60s and go to, the Newport Jazz Festival and see all those bands playing at the Newport Jazz Festival. Something like that would be pretty amazing. Yeah. Seeing Miles Davis Quintet and things like that. That would be nice. Let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz? I love the improvisational nature of it, and that, it's not like with other musical genres, things are more set in stone, I guess. With jazz, it's more fluid and free, and there's feels like more room for interaction with the band. You're playing with them, and you hear the drummer do something, and you can react, and you can improvise and be a little more spontaneous. And I also love in the jazz scene how it's common practice for instrumentalists to write their own music and bring that into the band. So I feel like there's more room for your own individual creative expression, which is what I love about jazz. What's one of the nicest things that a fan has ever said to you about your music? A fan compliment that you remember? I mean, I think when I play at the Rex pretty regularly in Toronto here, and you get some fans who just they love jazz and they know the Toronto jazz scene here, and they'll say to me, I love your playing. Who did you study with? And I'll tell them, some of the people, and they're like, oh, okay, we can hear it right away then. So to me, that's the ultimate compliment. If I say, oh, I studied with David Gray, or I studied with Aaron Goldberg or something, and then they say, oh, okay, we can hear it now. Yeah. Because those are my mentors, or my, those are the people that I love to listen to. So if a fan is recognizing any of that in me, then that makes me pretty happy. Everyone has a version of who you are. Your family, your friends, your fans.
But when you wake up and you face the world, who do you think you are?
You know, I feel like everybody has lots of different roles that they play, and some of that is to the different people, like to your family, your mom's daughter, your girlfriend, or your, to my students, I'm their teacher, and to my band, I'm the performer. So I feel like when I wake up, I'm always trying to balance all of these roles as well. You know, if I'm, I wake up, the first thing I do is I practice. So I'm, feeling right away that I'm identifying with being a musician and a piano player and get to do some creative, improvising at the piano. And then I kind of move on, and then I do sort of more business type things. I'm on my email, and then I go to teach. So I feel like all those different roles that maybe people see me in, I'm also always kind of balancing all these personalities as well. And it's important to me that they are balanced, because if I'm doing too much of one thing, I start to feel, I just feel unbalanced, like I'm doing too much teaching or too much of this other thing. So I think when I wake up, I'm also feeling all those different roles pretty much each day, I guess.
This is my final question. I want to know, as a practitioner of jazz and a teacher of jazz and having a good pulse on the craft, how healthy is jazz in the world in 2017?
I would say musically it's very healthy. There's so many amazing musicians out there doing all kinds of really interesting and different things, and there's room for people to do all kinds of things. Like in Toronto or in New York, there's within the jazz community, there's lots of different little pockets of people doing different things. Like in New York, there's the free improvised scene, or there's the kind of rock jazz people. So there's lots of amazing musicians playing at a very, very high level. But then I'd say where it's suffering is sometimes just, in Toronto anyway, there's maybe not enough clubs or enough venues where those musicians can go play. And because there's not enough of those clubs, or there's not enough, the music's not getting enough exposure, I don't think we're creating enough of an audience for the music. So I think it's kind of become a niche thing. Like there's not a huge audience base for it, really. So yeah, that's what I think. So musically, it's great, but maybe suffering. And then, of course, with all the streaming services, financially, it gets more and more difficult for musicians to keep doing what they're doing and, earn a living, basically. So there's ups and downs.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Teri, I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Thank you for taking some time out to talk about the new album, your life and music. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Chicago, Kansas City, Toronto, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Teri for her time, her stories, and her music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.